Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose, and we're going to go ahead and piggyback off of yesterday's topic. We have some continuation for the quote-unquote Xbox Steam console. Previously, we had heard that they're currently testing Steam on the Microsoft Store as we speak, and well, now today, we have even more information that really leans into this idea that this could actually be legitimate and that it's actually happening behind the scenes. So much so that Valve themselves is apparently in conversation to make this happen. Now, we also got some, I'd say, untimely Switch 2 news. I think some people might be looking a little bit too much into this, or at least this soon, so we're going to get into that as well. First, though, I do want to thank my supporters on Patreon and on YouTube memberships. Thank you just so much for what you do, and you will receive this video through early access. Let's go and get right into things, though, starting off with Metroid and some new trademarks that's currently creating a lot of buzz online. That's because Metroid Prime 3 and Metroid Prime Hunters were recently trademarked by Nintendo, which has led to some speculation that they'll soon release on the Switch 2 or the Switch 1 as some kind of HD bundle, similar to how Nintendo released Pikmin 1+2 leading up to the release of Pikmin 4. And hey, that would be awesome if true. But for me personally, I'm not really going into this with that as my expectation. I mean, if it happens, then hey, that's great. I've been wanting this to happen for years. But I think it's just as likely that Metroid Prime 2 will release as a Switch Online game by this point. I mean, you have to remember that they're trying to sell subscriptions with their GameCube add-on, and Metroid Prime 2 would likely be one of its better subscription sellers. Now, as for Metroid Prime 3, that's a little bit of a different situation because it's a Wii title, and the same can be said for Metroid Prime Hunters. That's a DS game. So, from my perspective, this is really just Nintendo doing their due diligence. They still see value in these games, and, they could potentially return in the future, but I don't necessarily look at this news as some kind of overwhelming indication that it'll for sure happen in the near future. If it does, though, then Metroid Prime 2 plus 3 makes a lot more sense than I'd say Metroid Prime Hunters. I'd be a little bit surprised if we get that as a part of some kind of bundle. Now, we also got confirmation that last year's Stellar Blade will get some kind of sequel, which I don't think is necessarily a huge surprise per se. If you've already completed it, you know that it ends with a tease that there's more to its story, but what is surprising is that Shift Up is targeting a release window that's, I'd say, a lot sooner than what you might expect. As a part of their financial results, they dropped this graph which details their plans between 2024 and 2027. 2024 being the first bookend is Stellar Blade's console release, but then after that, you'll notice it says that there's a platform expansion, which my guess is that it's referring to its PC release. But then even more interesting is that its sequel is listed right after that. So at least according to this graph, they're targeting a release by 2027, which is unprecedented for modern AAA games. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's impossible. The original game took 5 years to make, so they could shorten that time frame down because they already have a lot of assets in place that they could possibly reuse. Either which way, though, I mean, even if they don't meet their 2027 target, as they claim here, I'm actually really excited about a sequel because I really enjoyed my time with Stellar Blade. It's a very stylish action game with, in my opinion, a fun story that's a little bit different because its team is located over in South Korea, and they do have their own unique ways to tell stories. And that's one of the great things that's currently happening, I'd say, in the game industry. We are starting to see a rise in game development in regions that previously didn't make a lot of console games. Oh, and we also got an update for Doom: The Dark Ages. There's been a lot of conversation about its launch numbers. It hasn't particularly been strong on the Steam charts, only logging in a little over 30,000 concurrent players in its opening week. And just to kind of put that into perspective, Doom Eternal pulled in a peak of 105,000. So we are talking about a significant drop-off from game to game. But there is a major key difference in the two releases, and that's that Doom: The Dark Ages is also part of Xbox Game Pass and PC Game Pass, which theoretically could impact its Steam numbers. Well, we actually got some information from Bethesda as they revealed that Doom: The Dark Ages is the biggest launch in id's history, or at least in terms of its player count. It's already surpassed 3 million players, which is 7 times faster than any of their previous games. Again, though, this is a Game Pass title, so I think that's to be expected. I think the bigger question really is whether or not that shift to player count versus units sold is within their expectations, because those are two entirely different metrics. It is one of those things that kind of adds a little confusion when it comes to Game Pass titles, but for the time being, it's at least nice to hear that a lot of people are currently playing it, and hopefully that will boost its fan count over time. Now, speaking of Bethesda and Game Pass, we might as well go and talk about Xbox and their future quote-unquote console. I mean, it's actually crazy just how much this thing is leaking, probably years ahead of its release. We're currently hearing that it's targeting 2027. So, I mean, by this point, I'm really in the belief that Microsoft is allowing this information to leak online because they want to generate some hype. Especially now that a lot of people are questioning their future within the console business. A lot of people don't even believe they're going to make another console. So I think they might be purposely letting this leak out online. The one thing that we keep hearing, though, again and again and again, is that the next Xbox will be a console PC hybrid that can sideload other storefronts like Steam, because it'll be based on Windows. Now, if that actually comes to fruition, and there is an if here, this is still only a rumor until Microsoft confirms it themselves, but you know how the saying goes, where there's smoke, there's a fire. And the reality is that there is a lot of smoke behind this idea. I mean, we've been hearing the same thing for really a better part of a year now, and today we're going to add another log to the fire, because Jez Corden is now claiming that Microsoft is currently, as we speak, in talks with different PC storefront owners, including Valve, to bring their store over to the next Xbox console, and how that could potentially look. Now, admittedly, I think that's a huge question for not only us, but also for all of these other companies involved. One of the biggest concerns that I've seen online regarding this idea is, what does this mean for the Xbox store? You know, if you can install Steam directly to its Xbox UI homepage, then what exactly is the incentive to buy or to make games for the Xbox store? Why not just make them or to buy them on Steam instead, which, you know, Xbox already releases their games on Steam day one anyways. So from a business perspective, that is a risk that Microsoft would have to deal with. Now, maybe they could try to get a cut from Steam games that are sold on their platform, but personally, I think they're banking on the idea that you're going to boot directly into the Xbox OS, and that's where most of its customers will likely buy games. Of course, Xbox has a lot of longtime fans that would prefer the Xbox ecosystem with features like Play Anywhere, its cloud service, and things like Xbox Achievements. And I think that's who this console is being made for. That is its audience. So Steam would really kind of more so be a bonus for people who are already invested into the Xbox ecosystem. Steam would more so expand their library just that much more, especially with games from publishers like PlayStation as one such example. They release some of their games onto Steam. Now, of course, Microsoft also has a mission to sell Game Pass, and that's one of the main reasons why I believe they're attempting to transition their console fan base to their next platform in this way. The reality is that even though they're releasing various games on PlayStation and Nintendo now, they still have a lot of Game Pass subscribers on consoles that they make a lot of money from. And they also still sell a lot of games on their consoles as well, including third-party titles. So in order to retain that user base for their next console, that way they can continue to make money by doing those things, and to keep them from jumping to a rival in the future, then this could be an enticing way to do that. Here would be an easy plug-and-play quote-unquote console. A lot of people do prefer that as opposed to PC, where you have to tinker a little bit more. And this would also possibly be the most compatible quote-unquote console on the market, because it's also capable of running storefronts like Steam, which just so happens to also have, again, PlayStation games. So we're talking about a console that can play Xbox games, hopefully, with some backwards compatibility for Xbox 360, OG Xbox games, things like that. There would also be Game Pass games, Steam games, PlayStation games, and even emulation through its Windows backend. So it is an interesting idea in theory. Now, how it will actually sell with their multi-platform strategy in place, that's a completely different question. We need to see how all that plays out. But that's what I want to just ask you all. Would you be interested in a console like this? Let me hear it in the comments below. Now, one last thing before we go. Nintendo got, I'd say, an untimely report from Bloomberg. Here, Nintendo is trying to sell their brand new console, the Switch 2. But that hasn't stopped the rumors that a new Switch 2 iteration could already be inbound in the future. That's because Bloomberg claimed that Samsung is already pushing Nintendo to make a Switch 2 OLED model sometime in the future. And, that makes sense. Samsung would make a lot of money from something like that. But the thing is that you can kind of imagine how people are reacting to this, which personally, I think some people are blowing this a bit out of proportion. In my opinion, an OLED model, yes, is inevitable. It's eventually going to happen. Whether it be the Game Boy Advance, the DS, the Wii, the 3DS, or the Switch, Nintendo's no stranger to introducing newer models throughout a generation. But even with this report, that doesn't mean that it's going to happen anytime soon. Yes, Samsung wants it to happen. They make a lot of money from that. And it probably will happen. But the thing is that it'll probably happen years from now. I think Nintendo's main priority as of this moment is to pump the market as much as they possibly can with the current Switch 2. They don't want a second SKU right this moment. They just want to manufacture as many Switch 2 units as they possibly can and as fast as they can. Now, if we look at last generation, the Switch 1 released in 2017. Then they released the Switch Lite in 2019, and then the OLED in 2021. So maybe in 2 to 4 years we can talk about a Switch OLED, but I'd say as of today, I think this is kind of a meaningless rumor. For that matter, I don't even think an OLED model is as necessary as it was last generation. One of the main reasons that the Switch OLED was such a big upgrade was because the Switch 1, when it launched, had a terrible LCD display. The Switch 2, on the other hand, allegedly, has a great display with things like VRR and HDR. So there is a little bit of a difference this time around. But if you really just want an OLED, and if you want to wait for an undefined amount of time, well, then yeah, that's your choice. Just kind of understand that despite this rumor going around, that this could be 2 to 4 years away, like we saw last generation. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, make sure to subscribe, ring that bell, and peace out.